Chapter 5. Options, Lisa said as she sat across the desk from Vincent Fletcher Wednesday morning. It's all about options. We've got kids out there who don't have options. They look around, and all they see is that they don't have the options that the other kids do. It's called learned helplessness. She had read that several years before and had thought it was all a bunch of psychobabble at the time, but if it had a shot at getting through to the human version of Jabba the Hutt, sitting cross-armed in front of her, it was worth a shot. What Cordell Enterprises is trying to do is to show these kids that they have real options, and not just to be some hired hand working for minimum wage in some plant, but real options to lead and to make a difference in the community. And why would I want some minimum wage anvil joining my force? Fletcher asked, clearly unimpressed. Because, you see, sir, we're all minimum wage anvils until we decide to be something more. But none of us decides to be more until we really believe that's possible. You think I ever thought about starting my own company when I was 15? No way. That was too far away to think about. But I was lucky enough to have a teacher who showed some interest in me. She helped me with my art, she made my art important, and she helped me see that there were lots of other options with art other than just trying to get it hung in some gallery. That's what I'm wanting to give these kids, options. Without them, they're going to end up in here on one side of the desk. I'm just asking that you take a couple of hours out of your very busy schedule to show them that the other side of the desk is possible too. She sat, sensing that all the arguments in the world would get her nowhere. But if you're too busy... Slowly Fletcher leaned forward. Are the schools in yet? Exasperation jumped from her. See, that's the problem. Everyone's standing on the sidelines going, well, I'm not committing until they commit. And while everyone's standing around waiting for somebody else to make the first move, we've got kids carrying guns to school and jumping off bridges because we're all just too busy to be bothered, or we're too worried about how it will look if we get in and nobody else does. Well, I'll be honest with you, sir. All the heroics on all the bridges in the whole world aren't going to matter a single ounce if somebody doesn't get in this darn boat and start rowing. With steely, hard eyes, Fletcher looked at her. You're intense. You know that, Miss Matheson? So I've been told, she said with no smile whatsoever. So, what do you say, sir? You in or out? He took one breath, shook his head, and exhaled. Okay, I'm in. Looks like you pulled some overtime, Dante said when Jeff walked into the break room on Thursday morning. He was glad to be back to work. Time off was just one solid sheet of agony. Overtime? Jeff asked as he grabbed a drink from the water fountain. Is the new schedule out? No, man, Dante said in exasperation. That whole hero thing on the bridge, I think Hunter's even got it on tape. Oh, great. No, man, you looked good. It's cool. Dante lowered his eyes with concern. Isn't it? I was just doing my job. He went to the cabinet and looked inside. It wasn't a big deal. Wrong, man, Dante said as he stood and set his glass in the sink next to Jeff. Saving a life is a very big deal. On his heel, Dante turned and walked out as Jeff's head fell on the weight of the statement. He hadn't meant that the way it sounded. The fact that God had placed him on that bridge at that moment was not a responsibility he took lightly, nor one he would have simply passed on, but he just didn't like the 5 seconds of fame that went with it. It was going to be a long day. Hey, Taylor, how's it going? Hunter asked as he strode into the break room where Jeff was grabbing a drink 6 hours later. Good, Jeff said. What do we have left? Station cleanup. You can start with the bathrooms and then do the break room, Hunter said, looking around at the tables littered with remnants of meals gone by. Oh, and don't forget the gunky stuff around this sink. It's looking pretty skanky. Dante strode in. Come on, Daunt-man. We've got an appointment with a basketball court, Hunter said, turning Dante around. Destroy the skankiness, Jeff looked at the sink when they were gone. "I can do that." He was right earlier. This day was turning out great. The more they told her it couldn't be done because nobody wanted to do it, the more determined Lisa became to make this work. One way or the other, if she had to drag these people up to that podium, she was going to make this happen. Hayes wouldn't be thrilled that Fletcher said yes. Of that much she was sure. But what she couldn't quite decide was if he would have the guts to stick to his word anyway. Guys and promises. He was a guy, so it didn't look good going in. With a shove, she pushed through the station's front door at 4 o'clock, but this time there weren't people swarming across the tops of the trucks. In fact, nobody seemed to be anywhere. She shook her head and peered around the station. "Hello? Anybody here? Hello?" The braid at her back swung around her shoulder as she turned to glance outside. Still no one. The trucks were here, so they couldn't all be gone. "Hello? Anybody here?" "Sorry, everybody's out." The moment froze between them as suddenly the man she had seen only in her dreams for more than 2 weeks was somehow, beyond comprehension, standing right in front of her. Back. "Lisa?" Her sanity ran smack into the expanse of muscles protruding from his black t-shirt. "Jeff? What?" She laughed. "Wow, this is a surprise." He looked like he wanted to smile for one short moment, then he looked down at the plastic kitchen cleaning gloves on his hands. Not too subtly, he pulled them off. "Yeah, it is." The gloves were off now, and he looked around for somewhere to put them. Finally, he laid them on a table behind the wall. Are you here to see the captain again?" "Again?" she asked in surprise. He scratched the top of his nose. "Well, the guy said that a lady came to see him the other day. We don't get many ladies coming in around here unless they're carrying cotton hoses. I just thought..." She smiled at his nervousness. "Actually, I'm supposed to have an appointment with him in 5 minutes." "Oh, well, he was out back with the guys the last I saw him," Jeff said, but even after his words stopped, nobody moved. Her eyebrows went up when she sensed that she might have to figure out where out back was herself. Then the realization lit in his eyes. "Oh, I can show you if you want." "That would probably help." "It's this way." He pointed back in the direction he had come. Wishing they weren't in the middle of a fire station, she nodded, and, half following, half leading, she walked down that hallway to another. At the end of the second hallway, he slipped in front of her and popped the door open as sounds of an in-progress basketball game met her ears. Together, they walked to the fence, and she noticed how he kept himself and his gaze well away from her. "Captain, there's someone here to see you." In that instant, the game stopped, and 8 sets of eyes turned to them. "We had an appointment?" Lisa pointed to her watch, and in annoyance, Captain Hayes walked off the court and grabbed a towel off the bench. "We didn't cancel that?" he asked gruffly. No, sir, we didn't." The heel of her shoe shifted under her weight. Standing there, the gazes of 3/4 of a dozen guys trained on her, she felt like that fish in the market window again. Even that would have been all right, except that her senses kept telling her just how close Jeff's arm was to hers, and that alone was enough to send her sanity scattering. "Oh, well, I thought we had." Hayes ran the towel over his face. "Well, let's get this over with, I guess. You're going to have to play without me, boys." The 3 of them barely made it back to the door before the game resumed. At the door, Jeff opened it, and, pushing the strand of hair behind her ear, Lisa entered in front of him. The darkness engulfed her after the brightness of the sunshine, and she willed herself not to trip on some unseen obstacle on her way through the back of the station. If you don't mind, I'm just going to duck in here and get cleaned up a little," Hayes said, stopping at a door. "Oh, no problem," she said amiably. "I'll just be down here, waiting." He nodded and disappeared through the door, and, just like that, they were alone again. Hesitating with each small movement, she turned and headed back for the front. "So, I guess this means you got that job, then?" Jeff held his hands out, palms up. Yep, this is it. Nice. When they reached the break room door, he stopped, and she stopped too. So, why weren't you out? New guy on board, he said with a tight smile. I get to clean, they get to play. Ah, low man on the totem pole. Basically. Neither gaze could hold the other for more than a few seconds at a time, and his finally fell to the floor between them. I didn't know we were exactly into advertising the stations. Is business that bad? She laughed. No, not really. I'm just trying to rope Hayes into speaking at the youth thing, but I don't think he's too thrilled about it. Yeah, I could kind of tell. Was it that obvious? She leaned closer to him, although her arms were safely crossed at her chest. I think he hates me. His soft blue eyes caught hers. Why would he hate you? She wrinkled her nose. Because I didn't just go away. A breath made it past his throat just as a door snapped down the hallway, and instantly they both looked toward it and backed away from each other. Through the darkened hallway, Hayes emerged. I'm ready, he said, and with only one backward glance at Jeff, she left him standing there by the break room, wishing she never had to walk away. The scum around the sink was gone long before the guys came back in, and it was immediately obvious that her appearance had given them ample fodder for conversation. I'm not saying I'm going after her, Hunter said, sliding into one of the break room chairs. I'm just saying at this moment I wouldn't mind being in the chief's chair. Did you catch a ring on that finger? Dante asked, because I could handle having some of that honey in my hive, if you know what I mean. In disgust, Jeff threw the rag he was finishing up with onto the sink. Bodies. It was all the guys thought of. Where are you going? Hunter asked as Jeff hit the door with one hand. I was going out to check the truck. I noticed one of the tires is low. He didn't wait for the shrug Hunter gave him before he pushed out of the room. Quickly, he took a look at his watch. 20 more minutes, and he would be sprung from active duty to stand down. At the tire, he bent and put the tester on it. He was right. It was a little low, not enough to even really notice, but at least he didn't have to hang out in the break room and hear the crude remarks. That had never been his style. In fact, unfortunately, he really didn't have any style when it came to women, but if he had, it certainly wouldn't have been that. Quickly, he unwound the air hose, dragged it over to the tire, and attached it. Just work and forget about all of that. But for all the coaching, his own thoughts kept going up those stairs and into that chair just across from her. Fletch said yes? The captain asked in utter disbelief. Yes, he did. Lisa kept her tone level and professional. So, I just wanted to confirm your position on the schedule as well. When is this thing again? Mid-October. We haven't really set a firm date yet. We're trying to get all the available voices in first. Well, it's kind of hard to commit to something like that. It's a long time until October. Look, sir, I appreciate that, but in order to have a list to present to the schools, I have to get some solid yeses to go on. Now, when I was here last week, I was under the impression that I had your word that if Mr. Fletcher agreed, you would too. Was I mistaken in that impression? The wrinkles on the face deepened into a scowl. And what kind of presentation do I have to do? Some outline to explain the duties of the fire department and the leadership roles available. And I have to do it myself? Slowly, Lisa shrugged as her mind tripped down the stairs. I guess you could send someone in your place if you absolutely had to, but I really think it would be more effective if you did it. But we can work that out later. Right now, I need to know if I can put the fire department down with your name as a participant. To bring more pressure, she put the tip of the pen in hand to the notebook. Will you stand by the police department in helping the kids of our community? Yes, she had learned a few things about high-pressure sales tactics. Okay, put me down. But I'd like to be kept apprised of the others who you con into this thing. She smiled. Con? Yes, con, Ms. Matheson. You are good at it." "Why, thank you, sir." "Hey, Taylor." Hunter strode out into the station at just after 5. "You did get the groceries, right?" "Groceries?" Jeff straightened from where he was checking the last tire on the truck. "No, I didn't know we needed them." "What do you think? That refrigerator's going to stock itself?" Hunter asked with a sarcastic laugh. "Or are you good at cooking with air?" Cooking? I thought Brady and Dante were cooking tonight." "No, Brady and Dante have a standing date with a poker hand on Thursday night. So that leaves you. What's it going to be? You going to get groceries, or are you treating everybody tonight?" Slowly, Jeff scratched his ear, having not seen this bend until he was around it. "I guess I could get some pizza or something." "Oh, come on. We had pizza last week. Get a little creative at least." Creative. It was hard to be creative when he'd been working nonstop since just before 6:30 a.m. "Well, there's a little place a few blocks down. I think they do takeout." "Well, then, what are you standing around for? Supper's supposed to be served at 6. After taking orders from around the station, Jeff walked down the hallway from the lockers, pulling his coat on as he did. It was time to stop bringing the coat, he thought, swinging it on anyway. Middle of April was far too long to be dragging that thing everywhere. He stepped past the break room on cat feet so as not to call more attention to himself. If Hunter so much as noticed he was in the vicinity, it was a sure bet he would find something new to rag on him about. Trying to keep his spirit and energy from smashing into the ground, he turned from the hallway and nearly crashed right into Lisa, coming the other direction. "Hey," he said as his attention snapped to her. "You get your speaker?" "Barely," she said with a small smile. "You get your cleaning done?" "Barely." A moment, and then she started for the door. "I guess I'll see you." "You want some company?" he asked, wishing there was a way to just stay with her without having to ask all the time. He saw her hesitation. "To your car, I mean. The guys want takeout. I'm the designated gopher." "Oh, sure," she said, with an uncertain nod. He opened the door for her, and together they walked out into the sunshine. His hands found his jacket pockets, and although it was 80 degrees, the safety of his pockets felt very good. "So are you going home?" he asked, swinging his feet side to side so that the walk to the car had nothing straight associated with it. "Yeah, a whole bunch of work, a little home." She shrugged. "Not that home's all that great anyway. Little apartment and a television to talk to." His gaze swung to her. "You sure that's your life you're talking about there? Sounds like you've been spy-camming mine." They ambled into the parking lot, and his heart hurt at the sight of her little car in the visitor spot. He needed something to prolong this. "So, are you hungry? I'm going to get food anyway." The look she shot his direction sent him back into his own corner. "I'm not really big on dinner." "Oh," he said softly, but he couldn't let her get away again. "Coffee? You a Starbucks fan?" "I'm not really into coffee." She shook her head, and he noticed how her gaze traveled out to the traffic, far away from his. Every logical part of him said she was trying to let him down easy, but in this case there would never be an easy. "Then, how about a Coke float?" he asked, and that snapped her gaze back to his. "A Coke float?" "Yeah, Coke and ice cream." He shrugged. "A Coke float." Her eyebrows scrunched together. "And you get these where?" "Couple blocks down." He nodded forward as their steps reached the back of her car and stopped. "It's the little cafe I was going to. Nothing fancy, but it's kind of cool." He waited, and when she said nothing, the fact that he was making a huge fool of himself scratched across his soul. "I'm sorry. If you don't want to, that's cool. I just thought—" She stopped him with one look. "It sounds like fun." In all the days she had been alive, Lisa thought that she could surely have learned to control herself by now. So where the "it sounds like fun" had come from, she had no idea. Nonetheless, she found herself sitting in a booth across from him, a tall fountain glass filled with soft serve and Coke in front of her as he waited for the full order he had placed to be finished. "I can't believe you've never had one of these," Jeff said in that voice that made her toes curl. "Me and Kit lived on these things when we were growing up." "Nutritional," Lisa said with a nod. "Yep, right up there with broccoli and sprouts." He took a drink of his, and then he looked at her with anticipation and a small amount of apprehension. "It won't kill you, I promise." Slowly she took a sip from the straw, and a reluctant smile crossed her lips. "Good, huh?" he asked, smiling for her. She brushed the hair from her face as the fingers on the other hand laid softly on the table. Pretty good. Admitting any more scared her. "Told you." He leaned back in the booth and arched his arm over the back of it, pulling the heat to her cheeks. "So, tell me about this youth thing you're working on." Looked like the captain was elated. She let out an exasperated sigh and shook her head. "You would think it wouldn't be that big of a deal to stand up in front of a bunch of high schoolers and tell them about your job, but it's more like I'm proposing to Chinese water torture them." She leaned back and crossed her arms in a perfect imitation of Hayes and Fletcher. "Why don't you come back when somebody else says yes, Ms. Matheson? I don't have the guts to be the first one to say yes to this little scheme of yours." "It's so frustrating." Then she glanced around, lest one of them might be standing behind her, before ducking and taking another sip of her drink. "If I could have just had the businessmen do it, this would have been a snap." He leaned forward. "So, why didn't you?" "That's not what the client wants, and the client is always right." "Ah, the real boss," he said, and she smiled at his grasp of the situation. "That's what they don't tell you about owning your own business. You don't have one boss, you've got 10 clients, and each of them think they are the only project you are working on. Voila, 10 bosses. It's completely annoying." "I can imagine." The blue of his eyes softened. "But I'm sure you're up to the challenge." "Sometimes I wonder," Lisa sighed softly. "It just seems like the harder I work, the farther behind I get. Like I'm on some kind of hamster wheel going around and around and around, and the only way off is just to get flung into the cage wire." Her finger traced several circles in the air and then pitched off to one side. She shook her head and put her lips to the straw. "Sometimes I wonder if it's even worth it." He watched her take a sip of the swirled white-brown liquid. Hopelessness dragged her spirit down. "I just keep thinking maybe there's something else I should be doing. Something more important or something." "Like what?" he asked, and she felt his gaze, although she didn't look up. "Like what you guys do, being out there, saving lives. That's something worthwhile. Not just putting some dinky little ads in a newspaper people are going to trash tomorrow." For a second he watched her. "That's funny," he finally said thoughtfully. "What's funny?" He shrugged. "I used to think the same thing back in college." Her forehead furrowed in surprise, and he laughed. "Yeah, college. BA, general business. Not for me, for my dad, really. But I put in the hours, and it says my name on the diploma. But business wasn't what I really wanted to do. I really wanted this. So, after college, I worked for a couple of years at a job I hated, and then I decided it was now or never." "So, you chased your dream?" "Yep. But you know, it's funny. I've been telling myself that once I was here, I would feel different, that I would be different. But now I'm here, and it's still me. I mean, I look around, and not much has really changed like I thought it would." He looked across at her. "Well, in most things, anyway." "So in some ways life has changed, though?" "Yeah." His gaze went to his finger tracing up and down the glass. "But that's not because of work." There was a beat in which neither of them said anything. "Taylor, your order's ready," the cashier called, and Lisa's attention snapped across the little restaurant. He slid out of the booth with no more words. She stood with him and swiped 4 bills from her purse as he held up his hand and reached for his own wallet. "No, hey, this is on me." Anger and fear flared. "I can pay my own way." A slow, lopsided smile slipped onto his face. I didn't say you couldn't. His hand didn't move when it had the wallet open. Please, my treat. Every particle of her was screaming, no, don't let him, he'll think you owe him. However, a hard fist in her chest forced her to nod and pick up her money. Okay. She was going back to the office after all, back to safety. He wouldn't follow her there. He couldn't. Quickly, he paid first at the table and then at the cashier's for the food. Lisa waited only long enough for him to grab the bags of food before she stepped away from him in case he had any notion of leading her out. On her own push, the bells on the door jingled as she strode out into the early Houston evening with him barely catching the door behind her. She was a woman, after all, not a helpless child, and letting him get every door wasn't the best way to show him she had no intention of owing him anything, now or ever. They walked down the sidewalk as the bags of food banged into his leg with every step. Steps and steps they walked until they were standing on a curb side by side. Have you ever noticed that you can't actually get all the way across a street in this town without the "Don't Walk" sign flashing? He asked, and her gaze jumped over to him as she wondered where that observation had come from. What? I'm telling you, you can't. There was not even a hint of levity in his tone. The sign says, walk. You take 2 steps into the street, and it starts flashing, don't walk, don't walk. I mean, why don't they just make it say, run, and be done with it? Skeptical climbed over her as she fought not to laugh. However, his craziness was too much to withstand. She looked over at him, and then shook her head and laughed. You don't believe me, he said as he looked out across the intersection. See, watch, I'll show you. The lights on the intersection flashed green to red, a second, and then the sign said, walk. Sure enough, she had barely made it 3 steps into the street before it started flashing. Don't walk, don't walk. Told you. At the other curb, she stepped up onto the sidewalk. And how long did this earth-shattering inspiration take you to discover, Einstein? It used to be a game, Jeff said with a shrug. When Mom would drag us shopping, Kit and I would stand on the curb like we were at a track meet and try to race the walk signs. Did you ever win? Not once. And your mom let you do that? Run across the street? She never knew. Lisa's eyebrows arched skyward, and he looked at her and smiled. Holding hands. That was a big deal with Mom, he said with a sheepish grin. You didn't get out of the car, that she wasn't going. You boys get somebody's hand. To this day, it feels weird crossing a parking lot by myself. Lisa laughed outright. You'll go into a burning building, but you can't cross the street without holding somebody's hand? He leaned closer to her. Don't tell anybody. It might ruin my image. Oh, okay, I won't, she said, as if they now shared a conspiracy. They reached the next curb. Together, but separate, they stood waiting. However, the moment the sign changed, she sensed that they were indeed in a race to see if one of them could beat the mythical sign. It didn't work. Not even midway across it flashed, "Don't walk," and Lisa wondered how many times she had crossed a street and never noticed that phenomenon. Once they reached the other side, their steps fell in sync with each other, and although to an outsider it might not have been obvious that they were together, to Lisa it felt like they were one in the same. So, do you work tomorrow? No, all night tonight, the 24-hour shift thing. Then I'm off until Sunday. 24 hours? Ugh. Yeah, as long as we don't get middle-of-the-night calls, it's okay. They walked a couple of steps as her heart said she hadn't remembered this walk being this short on the way to the soda shop. You working tomorrow? He swung his gaze on her for the briefest of seconds. Of course, I work all the time. Weekdays, weekends, morning, noon, night, 4 o'clock in the morning. You don't sleep? She shook her head. Too many things to think about most nights to spend time doing something so trivial. 4 o'clock in the morning, huh? Slowly she nodded as they traced their way into the parking lot. Well, I guess now I'll be up at 4 o'clock in the morning half the time, too. He drifted off on thoughts of the nighttime. It's really a weird time of day if you think about it. I mean, it's strange to be up when everyone else is asleep." Lisa shrugged. "I don't know. It's the nice time of the day for me. Nobody calls. I've got the world all to myself. No clients, no employees, just me and work." "That's funny. The other night I was wondering why in the world anyone else would be up at that ungodly hour. It's nice to know I wasn't the only one." At her car, he leaned back on the Trailblazer next to it. "So, you think I could, I don't know, get your number or something so I could find out if I'm the only one awake the next time?" "My number?" she asked, and her skin jumped away from him. "Oh, I don't really give out my number." "Oh." He nodded and halfway smiled. "That's cool. I just thought—" "Stupid, don't do this." The thoughts clawed through her, even as she dug into her purse. "Tell him no, Lisa. Leave. Now." However, her hand produced her business card for her heart, and with her gaze down, she offered it to him. "In case you're ever bored at 4 o'clock in the afternoon." Gently, he smiled at her as he took it. "Like when I need a break from sink cleaning?" "Yeah, something like that," she agreed with a reluctant smile. Then she turned and looked at her car. "Well, I'd better get back to work, otherwise it might be 4 a.m. before I get to go home." "Yeah, I'd better get this stuff in before Hunter blows a gasket." He watched her get in the car, and then he stood holding the door and the food. "Drive carefully." Why was it so hard to just say goodbye? "Don't let Hunter get to you." "I'll try not to," he said with a laugh. "I'll see you." "Yeah," he said, and very carefully he shut her door. She started the car, waiting for him to slide out of the space between hers and the Trailblazer. However, when she backed out, he was still standing right at the edge of the car's path, those white bags dangling from his hands next to his knees. Offhandedly, she waved as her body traced down everything it liked about how he looked. Those pants curved in all the right places, the jacket draped over those arms that she couldn't get out of her head. And that smile, lopsided and completely amazing. He waved. She did too, kind of. When she got to the street, she looked back. He hadn't moved, and somehow it was like she was destined to be watching him in that rearview mirror forever. The next morning, Lisa was still on his mind as Jeff went to his locker to grab his coat at 6:30, fully prepared to head out with the rest of the guys. However, Hunter had other ideas. How he accomplished hanging a whole open bag of flour from the locker door without getting it everywhere in the process, Jeff would never know. But the second he opened the locker, the bag ripped and white powder spilled out, hitting the ground at his shoes and creating a cloud that drifted all the way up his clothes. With 2 coughs, he waved at the now white air surrounding him as he looked through it to his clothes. Snickers and giggles erupted from the far side of the lockers. "Nice," Jeff said with a reluctant smile as Dante and Hunter peered around the end of the gray metal, fighting back the laughter. "Very nice." "Have fun cleaning that up. I'd hate for the chief to happen by and see it," Hunter said, and he turned Dante toward the door. A tired sigh escaped as Jeff looked down at the white lava flow still cascading from the locker onto his shoes. Carefully, he picked one shoe up and then the other, and he walked over to the sink, knowing he was leaving a lovely white shoe trail behind him. "Crud, Witkowski bailed on me," a short, middle-aged fireman said, coming into the room as Jeff pulled the trash can over to begin the cleanup. "What am I going to tell Pat?" "What's the big deal?" The man's colleague, a tall, brownish-blonde, goateed man about half a decade older than Jeff, said in a deep voice that resonated off the concrete walls. "I'm sure she'll understand." However, they stopped in mid-conversation when they turned at the lockers and saw Jeff scooping the flour from the floor and transferring it into the trash can. "Problems?" "You could say that," Jeff said, wishing his voice sounded happier about the mess. The goateed man shook his head in sympathy and turned back to the conversation. "Pat's cool. I'm sure she'll understand." "Understand what? That I'm going to miss her birthday again? Like I missed Valentine's Day and Jenny's spring play and our anniversary before that? Yeah, I'm sure she'll understand." The shorter man shook his mostly hairless head. "I just wish I could find somebody else to cover for me on Tuesday. At least it would stave off a divorce for another couple months." Jeff was listening as he cleaned, and although they would know he was eavesdropping, he straightened and cleared his throat. "I could probably come in on Tuesday if you needed someone." The older man's attention snapped to Jeff. At first, his gaze was hard and cold. Then it softened slightly. "I haven't seen you around. You new?" "Yeah, I just started last week," Jeff said, nodding. The fact that he was still standing in a mound of white flour seemed to escape from his consciousness. "But I'm not busy Tuesday, if you need somebody." "What's your shift?" the man asked, with worry around the edges of the question. "Oh, no, it's okay. You don't have to switch or anything. It's no big deal. I don't mind covering for you." "You sure?" "Yeah, I work Sunday anyway, so Tuesday won't kill me." The man stood for a moment and then smiled and stuck his hand out. "Wade Frazier." "Jeff Taylor." He brushed his hand off on his pants, which did no good, and shook first one man's hand and then the other. "Gabe Teague," the goateed man said. "So you'll really do this?" Wade asked, rocking backward on the thought. "Yeah, no problem." Wade smiled mischievously. "Pat may kiss you." The tips of Jeff's ears went hot as he shrugged and bent down to the mess. "Just glad I could help." When Lisa's gaze chanced on the clock on her computer at 3:55 on Sunday morning, she almost laughed, and had she not been so tired, she would have. It had taken all of Saturday and most of the night to go through Kurt's idea of a ready presentation piece by piece and get it acceptable for Monday's meeting. Why was it that she had hired him again? She couldn't clearly remember anymore. In fact, as her mouse clicked across the screen, anything other than utter exhaustion was getting very little play in her brain. However, every 30 seconds or so, her gaze would slip down to that little clock in the corner as her dreams slipped to him. Her chin rested in her hand as thoughts of him drifted through her. He had said something about Sunday. Was he off on Sunday, or was that when he went back? She shook her head to clear it of him. However, seconds later he was there again, crowding through her work like a bulldozer. It was because she was so tired, she told herself. Her willpower, along with her energy, was shot. The mouse slowed as it clicked across her screen. 3:59 glowed back from the ether. Where was he now? At the station? At home in bed, asleep? On a call? In the fuzz of sleep invading her brain, she hoped it was one of the former and not the later. She was going to have to find out more about his schedule, she thought as the haze finally took over and she laid her head on the desk. She really was going to have to find out more about him. This has been To Protect and Serve, Volume 1 of the Courage series. Written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings. This has been a Braveheart Audiobooks production.
What's coming next? Find out. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel and never miss a second of the story.